Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
So we are talking today about guided feasibility studies. Well, we're talking about feasibility studies, and then we're talking about the ways we have come to think differently about them. So how many of you, is there anybody on the call who's either doing a feasibility study, thinking about a feasibility study, hiring a consultant to do a feasibility study, curious about a feasibility study, wondering what the hell a feasibility study is anyway? Where are you guys with regard to feasibility studies? I suppose I shouldn't use bad language, right?
Put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Put it in the chat. An in-house feasibility study. Yes, that's exciting. Thinking about all of that, about to launch a guided. Yes, indeed, Miriam. That's great. Okay. What is that? Good. All right. So let's start out with what it is, with what a feasibility study is. We thought we would share at some length with you today information about feasibility studies because it is a standard of capital campaign fundraising, and it has been a standard of capital campaign fundraising for decades. I mean, really for decades. And we have some new ways of thinking about it that we think are pretty interesting and that you should consider. So a feasibility study is a fundraising feasibility study. Capital campaign feasibility study is a time when you go out and talk to your largest donors and ask them what they think about your plans to move for your campaign and what it is you're going to raise money for. So let me say that in a more articulate sort of way. When you are planning a capital campaign, typically you figure out what it is you're going to raise money for. Maybe it's a new building or a new playground or something else that will help move your organization forward. And you develop those plans and you put some dollar figures attach dollar figures to it, and you figure out how much money it is you need to raise if you're going to accomplish that plan. And then you decide that you have to go and have conversations, or someone has to go have conversations with your top donors so that you can get a sense of whether it really is feasible, hence the word feasibility study. You don't want to say, well, we're going to do a $10 million building and then find that your top donors hate the idea and that nobody's going to give to it. So rather than than diving into your campaign and learning that the campaign is not viable, what you do is that you have these sort of preliminary conversations where you say to your top donor, where a consultant, typically you hire a consultant, and a consultant goes and talks to your donors and says, what do you think of this plan? And is this something when time is right, you'll be ready to consider a gift to, and will you be willing to help? And what do you think about this organization? And what are the strengths and weaknesses? And right. So these conversations are probing conversations with the top donors to an organization. And then if you hire a consultant to do it, they gather all that information and they put it all together and they crunch some numbers in a magical way, and they write a report, and they then meet with you and your board, and they say, well, we don't think you can raise $10 million. We think you can raise $6 million, or whatever the number is. Or maybe they say you can raise more than $10 million. It's not always less. Sometimes it's more. Through that process, you get a window into how your donors feel. right? And whether they're on board, and whether whether you should move ahead with this project, or whether there are things you need to work on to get yourself ready beforehand, right? It gives you information that helps you make decisions that are sound going forward with a big project. And feasibility studies have been a standard early campaign process for many, many organizations. Typically, or traditionally, organizations have done them by hiring consultants who go out and talk to their major donors and come back with recommendations. Now, I did that for a long time. I know what it's like to be a consultant. I know what it's like to have those interviews. And there are some times when that's the right approach. But through my career doing those, I gradually started having more and more questions about the process. I just wasn't sure that it was the right process. I wasn't sure why I, as an outside consultant, should be the one talking to donors, right? It sort of didn't make sense to me. And then I had some good, fairly wealthy friends who talked to consultants representing organizations again and again in feasibility studies. They were the people who were called in the feasibility studies. And they said, we really don't like to talk to consultants. We'd rather talk to the head of the organization. And they said to me, knowing that, that I like to tinker with new things, they said, why don't you figure out how to help organizations do their own interviews? So that set a challenge for me. And over the next 3 or 4 years, and with Amy's help, we came up with a different model, which has now proven to be pretty successful, pretty effective, particularly if the organization has leadership that is willing and interested and able to do those kinds of interviews. So, okay, that sets the stage.
Excellent. So I just want to remind everybody, and we'll get to, there are lots of good questions on feasibility studies, and comments, but also we're happy to answer any question, campaign or fundraising related. So don't limit your questions in the Q&A box. I know, you may be past your feasibility study or not doing one. So in a few minutes, we will get to all kinds of questions related to campaigns and fundraising if you put them in the chat box, or not the chat box, the Q&A. All right, so let's deal with feasibility studies for just a minute. So in the chat box, Liz says, I have a board member that wants to build a building and is going to donate $1 million, but doesn't want to do a feasibility study. Liz.
I have an answer for you, Liz.
Go ahead.
Sometimes using different language works miracles. So you're not doing a feasibility study, even if you thought you wanted to. What you're doing is a quick set of leadership interviews. Right? Bingo. Bingo. No feasibility studies. So why don't people want you to do feasibility studies? Well, some people hate the idea that you're spending all this money on a consultant. Some people have had consultants beat away to their, desks again and again doing these feasibility study interviews, and they hate them, like my friends who didn't like them. So you don't have to say we're not. You can say yes. Yes, and, right? Yes, and is a wonderful set of words. Yes, and. It's a set of words you should put in your brain. And every time someone says you shouldn't do such and such, you say, yes, you're exactly right. And here's what we're going to do, right? You change the language, right? And it makes the people who said, no, don't do that, feel like you've listened to them. And it gives you a way forward, and it's pretty simple, but you have to have it in your brain, right?
Right.
Yes, and is an improv thing, right, Amy? I just haven't gotten around to organizing the next improv session, but
Yes. And so there's lots of different things you can call it. In addition to leadership interviews, you can call them donor conversations. What else can you put them in the chat box? Let's see. What else have you called your pre-campaign? You could do a formal or informal survey of your leadership level donors, an in-person survey. So survey, leadership interviews, donor conversations, and it can be as formal or informal as your organization allows or enables. And, we've said this before, but just a reminder, there's 3 approaches to capital campaign feasibility studies that we highlight inside the toolkit. And it is for our client members, but really we provide options. We say there's a system of do-it-yourself donor conversations. There is the traditional approach of hiring a consultant to do it. And then there's the hybrid version, which is our guided feasibility study model. And you want to do it as, one of the ways. You want to talk to your donors and your lead potential donors prior to a campaign to get their feedback, whether it's as formal as a typical traditional feasibility study, or it's more informal, like a donor survey, where I would encourage you to actually not just send a survey, but have conversations with your donors. I saw Stephen, thank you, say take the temperature, right? Take the temperature, evaluate the interest, the appetite. Good. So a planning assessment or a planning and assessment conversations, good. Lots of good suggestions. You can call it anything you want. Right. And then appease your donors or your executive director who doesn't feel like they want to do a traditional feasibility. They may not want to do a traditional feasibility study, but you do want to take the opportunity to engage the community, your biggest potential donors, the community leaders in the project, and get some feedback prior to launching so that they feel engaged, that they feel involved, that they're really insiders.
Here's one thing about all of these approaches, well, no matter what it is you call it, but the process of going and talking to your largest donors. So what a study does, or a set of leadership interviews, or whatever it is you want to call them, is that it creates a context for talking to your donors, which gives you permission to call them in a way that doesn't feel like it's out of the blue. And I think that's a big deal, actually, that if you say to someone, you can use it in all sorts of situations. If you say to someone, I always like to make Amy into a major donor, right? Amy is a wealthy woman who is a major donor. So if I call her up as the executive director and say, hey, Amy, let's go out to lunch. I'd love to talk to you about my organization. What is Amy immediately thinking?
You want a gift.
You want a gift, right? But if I call her and I say, Amy, we have identified 20 people, right, who are leaders in our organization and in our community. And we're trying to understand better how the community sees us, right, and sees our plans. Would you be one of 20 interviews that we're having in that? What do you think then?
Right. And give us some feedback on our plans for the next 3 to 5 years or whatever it is. Right. Great. Yes, I would love, you're looking to me for advice and feedback. I'd love to.
Exactly.
Right? I'm honored.
So there is something about context, about creating a context for conversations that is really good, particularly when you want to be talking to your largest donors who know that you tend to come to them when you need money. Right? That's their antenna are up. And if you actually go to them, this is the old ask for advice business, but you really should be asking for advice, and you should create a context for doing that. A feasibility study is a very specific way to do that, to make that happen.
All right, Michelle, I see your question. I think we just answered this and you typed it before we answered it. But what is your response to organizations that don't want to do a feasibility study? So, call it something else, some sort of modified feasibility study. And we just listed 10 or so things that surveys, interviews, whatever. Okay. So, all right, Andrea, you want to go? Do you have a question?
has just asked a good question about this. And again, when you have questions, it's easier for us if you put them in the Q&A. So otherwise, they sometimes disappear. But Kim has asked, would a feasibility study also relate to community need, or would it be exclusive to raising funds? So here's why that's an interesting question, because there are many kinds of feasibility studies. One is specifically a fundraising feasibility study in which you're testing to see how much money you can raise. But you can also have a project feasibility study in which you're actually talking to people in the community to see how your new project is going to fit into the community, where you hire engineers to look at things like zoning and stuff like that, right? Where you actually looking at the feasibility study of the project itself. And that's a different kind of a feasibility study. So Patricia Smith joined late, but she wants to know, well, what really is a feasibility study?
I'm going to put a link. I think we covered it pretty thoroughly at the beginning. So you can either go back and listen to the recording on Thursday when the podcast comes out. And I'm going to put a link to everybody right now for our feasibility study page in the toolkit. And you can go read about it on our website.
That's a good idea. So our anonymous attendee, and we never know if it's the same or not, if it's different, says they're going to be doing one, though her ED or his ED doesn't see the point. We already know our donor base can't support the campaign. Oh my God. By the way, it was the ED who decided to do the campaign. They said the donor base can't support. Well, you've got a bigger problem than a feasibility study. And it's a problem that will likely require some careful attention. And I don't know what your role is, but I'd be looking carefully at the potential of success of an organization with leadership like that. I hate to be so blunt about it, but that's the way it makes me feel. I've learned many things over the years. Some of them are not good or not right, but some of them are right. And one of them is that it's very hard to be successful if the head of the organization is seriously challenging, is inconsistent, is not courageous, is not willing to lead. If you don't have leadership that is effective, it's very, very hard to be good in your job as a fundraiser.
And this particular ED doesn't believe in the success of the project.
Really?
Based on what you're saying, they believe it's going to fail. And so, they're setting you up and them up, the organization up for failure, because they're going, there is a lot of headspace in terms of success of a campaign, because if you believe you're going to succeed in a campaign, then you will take action and do the things that you need to do to be successful. If you believe that the donors aren't out there, or that they can't support at the levels you need, or that they won't for whatever reason, then there's no reason to go call them, to talk to them, to ask them for gifts, to approach them. And so your beliefs in advance of either success or failure will probably dictate the behavior of the people around you at the organization. Because if the executive director already knows, quote unquote, that the donor base can't support the campaign, why put in the effort? So it's seriously problematic. So you, more than anybody, needs a feasibility study to come back, because not only does a feasibility study say whether or not you can probably raise a certain amount of money and, feedback on the project, but it also, a good feasibility study will tell you what you need to do in order to get ready to raise the kind of money that you're looking for. So it may say, you can't raise it this year, but if you do X, Y, and Z to cultivate donors, to build your base for support, to get more volunteers, then maybe in a year or two, you'll be ready. So there's other good things to come out of a feasibility study, because you should come away with what you need to do to be campaign ready. Okay. What's another question?
I've worked for a lot of organizations that while I've been working for them, there's a leadership change, right? And I'm always just gobsmacked by how much of a difference it makes immediately. I mean, leadership matters. It really does. It's not just a little thing. You get, all of a sudden, you get somebody who is a competent leader, and it's like the organization gets a lift. It's like everyone gets excited and is willing to move forward. Leadership is fascinating. If I ever had another career in me, which I don't, I would probably study leadership.
All right, let's try and take some of these questions in order here. Pamela is asking for advice on creating a case for support, in her particular case for a chorus and symphony. But I think we'll talk generally about creating a case for support.
Yes.
So,
and Pamela, I think you've been on before, is that right? And you've asked other questions about a case for chorus and a symphony. And let me recap what I think we may have said before. But a really effective case for support does a number of things. But one of the things that it does that most people miss is that it talks about the benefits as opposed to the features. Now, it also talks about the features, but it talks about why does it matter to have a chorus and a symphony? What's the difference a chorus and a symphony make? And to the extent you can articulate that and get your board members to articulate that and talk about whatever spiritual, lift they get from that, or the community adventure, or what difference music makes. I mean, there are some people who can be so articulate about that. And so begin with having conversations about the benefits of what it is you're doing. Then you will want to be very clearly say, here's what we're doing, right? Here's what we're doing. Here's how much it's going to cost, right? You want to include that, but you don't want the whole thing to be about that. Right. So begin your case for support with a wonderful statement about why it's exciting, why what you're doing is making a difference and having an impact on the people who are part of what you're doing, whether they are people in the chorus or audience members or the larger community for some reason. So start there, then say, here's what we're doing, here's how much it's going to cost, and won't you help? Actually, you should end also by reminding people of why it's important, right? So sandwich it, beginning and end, with the exciting part of it, right? And then at the end, have some kind of a call to action. Now, your case for support does not have to be 10 pages long, right?
It should not be 10 pages long.
Nobody reads 10 pages anymore.
Three
max.
I think three max with white space and headings.
White space and headings, yes. And here's a tip for you all. If you're working on a case for support, here's what I think is the best test for a case for support. Once you've written it, on a separate document, pull out the headings, just the headings, and put them by themselves on a separate document. Then get someone to read the headings and ask them if they understand what it is you're doing and why.
Right. And yes, they should be, because Andrea's point, in case you missed it, is that many people will just read the headings. They will not read what you typed. And so the headings need to also tell the story, and the paragraphs can fill in the details. Now, also ask people to look at it with an eye of, if they switched it for any other organization, arts organization or chorus organization or school in the country, could they identify it as yours? Or is this just, the same as any other school, any other animal shelter, any other college, make sure that you are distinguishing yourself. All right. So somebody's asking to talk through a good introductory email or phone call to a prospective major donor. what it might look like or sound like.
Before we get to that, I just want to quickly answer Stephen, because he picked up on something we talked about before. When you say leadership change, he asks, do you mean development team, board chair, board members? In my mind, I actually was thinking of executive directors, but I can make the case for it all. If you're in a big development shop and you have a change of leadership in the development shop, it will make a huge difference. If your board chair changes, it will make a difference. If your executive director changes, it will make an outsized difference. I mean, this is not just little stuff that changes. What happens is that the organization takes on the coloration and the essence of the people who are in leadership positions. When they are good, it's fantastic. When they are not good leaders, everything tends to fall apart. And I have learned over the years that sometimes the best leaders are the ones that are not the most front and center and rabble-rousy. Sometimes they're quiet and gentle people. They just have a way of setting a direction and empowering the people who work under them. So it's not that a good leader has to be, here's where we're going and here's what we're doing and you have to follow. Really the best leaders I've worked with have often been understated, quiet people. And all of a sudden you look around and you say, hey, this organization is really functioning well. Why is that? Look and see how the leadership is functioning. I promise you it's connected, even if that person is not very
dynamic.
Visible or dynamic, right? Dynamic, exactly.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So let's go to this question about a good introductory email or phone call to a prospective major donor might look like or sound like. So I'll start with this one and then you can add anything you want, Andrea. So, I think it depends on where you're at in the process with this individual. And I guess since you're saying an introductory email or phone call, you're not going to them initially to ask for money. You're going initially to connect with them, to get to know them, to ask for information or advice. And once you know that they have an interest in your organization, that you can answer some basic questions about them, then you would be in a situation to go back and ask them for a gift. But to me, my rule of thumb is if you can't answer some basic questions about a person, like why they're interested in your organization, why they care about the mission or cause or campaign, what excites them about your organization, you are not prepared to ask them for a gift. And so an introductory email or phone call would be like, I am responsible at my organization for getting to know the people that care about our organization. And I would love to hear why you've been a donor in the past, or why you're a volunteer, or why you're a supporter, or, any number of questions.
Right.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Let me do some more role playing. We're going to put Amy back in her role as a wealthy donor. And I don't know her yet, but I work in at a school, at a magnet school where kids come and do acting. And I happen to know that her daughter is going to that school next year. So I might send Amy a letter saying, hi, Amy, I'm so excited to see that your daughter is coming. I don't know you personally, but I would love to talk to you about your daughter's coming, about your interest, how you feel about her coming. So let's see if there's a role for you to play here. Can we get together and get acquainted? Right? What's she going to do? Say no? Her daughter's coming to the school. She wants to build a relationship, right, as well, right? She wants to. So now how did I do that? I did that based on something I had researched about this donor, right? It was like, all right, I looked into it. I found something about that. I had a call this afternoon where we're actually pitching an organization on doing a guided feasibility study. And I took the time to look into each of the people that I knew was going to be on the call. Were going to be on the call. Each was, I don't know, whatever. And to find out where the common threads were, right? So I could go on the call and say, oh, so-and-so, I see that you were at such and such a place. right? So I could get where they are. That's the key. You need to get where they are, not where you are. That's the key to life, actually, right?
So Paul's written that approach sounds painfully passive to him, and he doesn't agree with it.
Oh, good. Say more.
Yeah. Well, first of all, say more. But listen, there's aggressive fundraising, since you use the word passive and passive. I think that what happens when people just go in for the ask is that you might get a small gift. If you go to somebody who you don't have a relationship with, they might give you a what we call a go away gift, right? You come to them, you ask them for a gift. They say, okay, here's $100 or $1,000. But if you don't know why they care or why they're involved or why they might be invested, you can't craft a truly major gift or a significant ask for them to be involved and invested in your organization. One of the tools that I use to evaluate whether a fundraiser is doing a good job or not is I look at the number of asks, individual asks they make. So, let's say it's a campaign and we're in the leadership level phase and they go out and they ask, 30 people for big gifts. If they get 80, 70, 80, 90% of the gifts they asked for, then I think they are doing a great job. If you don't know anything about your donors, my guess is you're going to get less than 50% of the gifts you ask for, maybe far less. And, you're spinning your wheels, you're wasting your time, you're not doing research, you're not getting to know your donors. And to me, it's a problem. So I'm happy to keep looking at. Paul's going to write back in, but I don't know if we should. Okay, so Paul says his most successful approach was a first telephone call. And I said, this is what the funding from you will do if you support this. Okay, so one call, Paul, when you've made 100 asks, come back and let us know how they go. I'm glad you got lucky on your first call. That's awesome. But in general, fundraising is about relationships. And, what I would say to you on that one call, you got $150,000. Maybe that's $1 million donor. And as you develop the relationship, if they can give you 150 on a first call, just think of what they could give your organization if you took the time.
Blew it, Paul.
I don't know. All right, here we go.
Wait. Here. So the other thing that I think is relevant to Paul's point is that the approach will vary depending on who you're calling. And sometimes you're calling someone who is transactional. Sometimes you're calling someone who doesn't want a relationship with you. They're trying to one-up somebody. They're, right? To the extent you can shift your approach so that it actually fits the approach of the person you're talking to, that will be great. And clearly, Paul, your approach to that particular person was spot on. Right? It really was spot on. And another person you call may be totally offended by it. So you need to do your homework. And I'm not suggesting you aren't going to do your homework, but everybody needs to do their homework to get a sense of who the person is. Maybe you're having a different kind of conversation to try to evaluate that. Maybe you're talking to other people and say, hey, what can you tell me about this person? How do they like to function? Right? Do they like sweet? Do they want to build a relationship? I also think, and then I will stop talking, but I also think that there tends to be a pretty significant difference between men and women. And there's actually a fair body of research out now that an old friend of mine has done a bunch of writing on about how women like to be approached often as opposed to men. So that's something to consider.
Just in case anybody didn't notice, Andrea just beautifully demonstrated yes and with Paul, right? We're going to pick on you, Paul. I appreciate you pushing back. I think it's important. Everybody needs to push back. Sometimes what we say is totally made up and bunk. So anyways, But Andrea, beautiful. Yes, and yes, you are right. And there's more to it than that, right? All right, good.
Right. So the other thing, to remember, and Amy and I talk a lot about this in terms of running our business and life in general, is to remember, and I know we've talked about it here before, is the Oreo cookie approach. Right? That if you have criticism or you want to say something that doesn't feel quite so good, you should really couch it between two layers of goodness. Right? And that's actually a wonderful life practice, right? It takes some practice. It does take some practice. That when you want to say to somebody, gee, that's really a terrible idea, you don't want to say it like that. You want to say, yeah, here's what's really great about what you said. And you might want to think about it this way. And by the way, I'm really impressed by how that came out. Right? That's the Oreo cookie.
Yeah. So, all right. So
Oreo cookies.
Let's do that with Paul's next question. So thank you for engaging, Paul. We love it.
I like that. Bite once, kiss twice. I like that.
Paul wants to know. Oh, who said that? Bite once, kiss twice. Yes, great. Paul also wants to know partnering on an equal basis with for-profit corporations where they benefit by affiliating with our social cause. Where they need, not merely want, to back the social mission. Yeah, I think that's really specific probably to your case. And I'm curious, if other people in the chat box want to weigh in on if you've had success partnering with for-profit organizations. I'm sure there's a list of pros and cons that as long as the day is long. You have anything quick to say about it, Andrea?
No, I don't know what to say about it. I think that I think you're exactly right. For some organizations, that's appropriate. It's nothing I am comfortable with commenting on. I simply don't know enough. But I do want to talk about Jennifer's question here. And she asks a question about other forms of of other ways to raise money towards a project. I think it's an important topic. Actually, in the Capital Campaign Toolkit, we have a chart that is what we call a sources and uses chart, which shows that there may be multiple funding streams for a particular project, one of which is the philanthropic capital campaign. But you might also be going for new market tax credits, for government funding, and just as you've outlined here, for bonds, for other funding. That's all appropriate. And the capital campaign will be good for some things, but not others, right? And new market tax credits will be good for some things, but not others. So you can create a sort of spreadsheet that shows, all right, which of those sources are going to be good to cover construction or planning or endowment or new equipment. What you'll find is that you can lay it out showing what you're going to want to spend money for. But all of it's important. There's nothing that says that your project has to be funded 100% from philanthropic dollars. So you point to something important here.
Yeah, many campaigns will have a variety of funding. Lots of organizations will do some financing, so mortgage, etc. All right.
How about Joy's question here? Let's see. I'm the ED and the only one doing development with the board of a small arts organization. I'm fond of small arts organizations, Joy. Just Amy knows that. I've been doing a sort of pre-feasibility study to bring donors into the storyline before we have actually made specific growth decisions. I know this is a little sticky. Is there an obvious downside to doing this, or is it a good thing to do? Is there a caution bringing people into the conversation in advance? Joy, there is no caution at all, and you should do more of it, right? It's a wonderful thing to bring people in advance. Be sure you listen to what they tell you, right? Ask them probing questions, find out what they think, see how they want to be involved. Listen to what they say. When you hear the same kinds of comments from a bunch of people, then you may want to shift the project or the plan a little, and then you let them know, right? It's a wonderful idea. Keep going. Do more. It's great.
Okay. So we've got this very long question from an anonymous attendee. And I have to admit, the longer the question, the harder for us to read it.
My eyes don't like to read that little print.
Yeah. So I'm going to read the bolded part. And that's how do I motivate them to do more? The campaign chair has not been implemented.
Yeah. So the gist of it is that she is having trouble getting her board to function when it comes to fundraising. And she's wondering if midway through the campaign, she can now bring on a campaign chair, and the campaign chair will help do more fundraising. Right. And maybe the board chair doesn't think there should be a campaign chair. Right. So here are some problems with that approach, and maybe you can pull it off. But the problems are this. Let's say we were going to Amy. I keep pointing to you, Amy. We were going to Amy to ask her to be the campaign chair. Right now, the real reason we're asking Amy to be the campaign chair halfway through the campaign is that the rest of the leadership has gone to sleep. So Amy wants to know, well, why isn't your board chair? Why isn't your board doing this? And you, of course, can't say, well, they've all quit or gone to sleep or they're not willing to do the work. And now I want you to do the work, because why would Amy want to do the work midway through a campaign that's having its troubles? So you're going to have a hard time positioning that in a way that is positive, right? I would be more inclined, I think, to put together a let's finish this campaign committee, right? Or something like that, right? To say we have only $50,000 left to go, or whatever it is you have left to go. We've been really successful in raising the first half. Now we're regrouping with a new committee to finish out this campaign for the second half. And maybe you can get someone to step up to be the chair of that committee, rather than the chair of the campaign. And maybe your board chair would serve on that committee, right? So this is a traditional approach to capital campaigns, which is use ad hoc committees to accomplish specific things and frame what needs to be done in a positive way rather than a negative way. So that way may help you.
Yeah, Joanne's suggesting the Bridge the Gap Committee.
Yes, exactly. The Bridge the Gap Committee, or something like, or Shoot for the Stars Committee, or, yeah, exactly. Right.
Since it's a monument, you said Build It Tall Committee, or I don't know.
Yeah, all right. Whatever, right?
Yep.
Let's get the head in the hat committee now.
Yeah. All right.
Put the man on the horse committee. There's all those monuments, men on horses. All right.
Yes. All right. Okay. So somebody's saying it looks like they only think we need to get new people to support us. We are a college. Yeah. So, I get calls all the time saying, can you help us find major donors, as if major donors are out there somewhere. And what you need to do is point back to the center of your organization and say, listen, the only people who really care about us enough are people who are in here. So we need to look introspectively at our organization. And you're a college, so you've got all the alumni and all the families of current students, and and faculty and former faculty. Those are the people that are going to care enough to support your organization. There's no new people. Maybe perhaps some alum who hasn't supported yet to date, but it's not going to be people who probably are not involved. I guess some occasions are businesses in your college town or community that are hiring graduates of your organization. But really, the people that are going to support your campaign and your organization are people who are part of your community and who have a reason to care about your mission and your cause. All right.
Okay. Melissa, did we get to Melissa's question here?
No, go ahead.
No. So I'm consulting for an organization that's based overseas. The American Friends organization and Mother organization overseas are currently in the same database. The American president wants to explore building an infrastructure here in the US. Is there a compelling reason to be in the same database or have separate databases? Do you have a sense of that, Amy?
I can't think of a reason to have separate databases, but
as long as things are tagged appropriately.
Right.
Right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
If anybody else has a different opinion in the chat, go right ahead. All right. Let's see.
Do you have ideas about how you might reinvigorate original volunteers to finish strong? And this goes back to what we were saying before, which is create a special little piece of at the end to get over the top, shoot the moon, right? And create a timeline for it. Be sure it has a beginning, middle, and end, and see if you can get someone to give a challenge gift. That if it gets over the top by such and such a date, right, something wonderful is going to happen. Right, yeah. They're going to send all of the members of the committee to Bimini or the South Seas. I'm just but something great happens when they get over the top, right? So there are 3 ideas for you. A lost and found. I've always wanted to do a lost and found sign for major donors. Can you help us find this person?
Okay. Thank you for bringing levity to our afternoon, Michelle. Appreciate that.
Here's the gist of that: is you were lost and now you're found. This sounds like a religious revival of major gifts fundraising. I was lost and now I'm found. No.
All right. Maravik, I think that, am I saying that right? What if it's the opposite and the board can't think beyond the weeds and they focus on micromanaging instead of being visionaries?
Oh God,
yes,
go to sleep.
That is a challenge, Maravik. I think that a lot of organizations face. There are always board members that want to micromanage. Go ahead, Andrea. You look
That's a leadership issue.
Yeah.
Right. We were talking about leadership beforehand, right? Really. So if you haven't done that, have the people on your board go to Asking Matters and take the asking style assessment on Asking Matters. And I'll tell you why. It's a funny story, actually, that when Brian Saber and I were first developing the Asking Styles material, we were testing it. We didn't have a website yet, and we were testing it, getting people to fill out things on paper. Can you believe we actually would send people forms, right? They filled out paper, and then we would collate the paper. So some guy who was a development director at a small college asked if we would do the Asking Style assessment for his board. It was a big board, something like, 42 people, 32 people. And we said, yes, of course, we were looking for people to test the Asking Style assessment. Sent him the forms. He had his board members fill them out. He sent them all back to us. And I remember sitting at my dining table, sort of collating all the responses. And the results came back that everyone was what we call in the Asking Styles business, everyone was a mission controller. A mission controller in the Asking Styles language, these are people who are totally in the weeds. Right? They're totally detail oriented. There's nothing in them that is eager to do visionary stuff. I mean, it's one of 4 Asking Styles. And these are people who would make me totally crazy, right? I'd commit hara-kiri if I had to spend way too much. So of 42 people, something like 37 of them were mission controllers. I called this guy. I said, listen, I've got a big problem. I said, either my test is wrong or your board has serious problems, because everyone came back a mission controller, right? And he laughed. He said, oh no, now I understand that's what's wrong with my board. Everyone is a mission controller. Yeah. So, but if you get your people to take the Asking Style assessment, then you can have a conversation about that. That would give you language to talk about some people being in the weeds and some people not being in the weeds. So take a look at that. It might help you.
All right. I want to go back to a slightly earlier question. Stephen Benini is reacting to the Close the Gap campaign, or the, getting over the hump campaign. So some donors, he says, want to be first, but some donors want to help bring the project over the finish line. So anybody that you approached and asked for a gift in an earlier part of the campaign that didn't give yet should be resolicited. Say, listen, I know you weren't ready to contribute when we were just getting started. Here we are, more than halfway through, or 90% of the way there. And now we're looking for your support. Will you help us get over the finish line? I think it's a great point. And so don't write off the people that you asked that haven't given yet. If you think they were good potential donors, go back. Some people do not want to be the first donors to a campaign, but they're happy to bring it home. So good point. Thank you, Stephen.
All right. I'm so sorry that didn't work out for you. You have a leadership issue. And there are two things you can do about a leadership issue. One is to find a way to get the leadership to change, and the other is to find a new job.
Are you answering an earlier question? Yes.
No, she said she got all of her people to take the Asking Matters assessment already. Oh. She knows about that. And she paid $300 for a training, and they never did either of them, right? They're her board. I mean, really.
Yeah.
It's too frustrating. Life is short, right? For someone who is old, I have to tell you, life is short. It goes by really quickly. And you should work at a place that is exciting, where you feel the leadership is good and you will be successful. Because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? So have the courage to put yourself in a place which will bring out the best in you.
All right. Yeah. Ellen says people quit their bosses, not their jobs. And I think that's so true. Ellen,
right.
You're right about that. You should
quit your bosses. If your boss is terrible, you shouldn't stay there. You should have the courage to go and find something else.
All right, Andrea, we've got 3 minutes, and I'm going to say we're going to Patricia's question, because we're going to wrap up the way we started, talking about a feasibility study, because that's how we started. So process, elements, outcomes. I do think we talked a lot about it at the beginning, but let's just wrap up with some final words of wisdom for feasibility studies. To me, there's such a critical part of the campaign. They set you up for success. And so, I was talking to a potential client the other day, and she said something about, I'm going to try and wing it on my own for a while, and I'll call you back when I'm losing my mind. I said, you know what? I don't want to talk to you when you're losing your mind. I want to help you set it up correctly. Don't call me when you're drowning. I mean, it's okay. We do help organizations, climb out of the holes that they've dug, but it's so much more successful for everybody when we start moving in the right direction. And she goes, oh, that's a great point. I will start off on the right point. She said, all right, you've convinced me. I'll hire you now. I won't hire you in 6 months when I've done it all
I'm
wrong.
In trouble, right?
Yeah. I said, come on, please help yourself out, help your campaign out, help us out. Like, let us get you off to the right start. And that's what a feasibility study does. It presents everybody on the same playing field. It sets your campaign up for success. If you do it well, you've engaged the biggest potential donors who are then ready to be asked when you come back to them weeks or months later. And so, Andrea, final word.
Patricia's asked about a project feasibility study. And Patricia, that's quite a different animal. It is, let's say you're building a new building and you have to hire engineers and you have to check out zoning and you have to check out all, building projects are complicated. And there are many things other than fundraising that goes into them. So a project feasibility study tests that. And any engineer or project planner will know about that. So be sure you understand that a fundraising feasibility study is what we do, but a project feasibility study undergirds the success of the project itself. And that is equally important. It usually precedes a fundraising feasibility study.
All right. Listen, we're just about out of time. Lots of great questions coming in at the last minute, and, post them first next week so we can get to them. And also we're happy to talk to you throughout the week. So feel free to send us an email, pick up the phone and call us. We're here. You can find us at the capitalcampaigntoolkit.com website. Andrea, As always, it is a pleasure doing these with you. I just love it.
It is always fun, Amy.
We'll talk to you all next week.
I always feel like I'm tap dancing a bit too fast, and one of these days I'm just going to try twirling around and fall on my nose. But
not today.
Not today.
All right. Bye, everybody. See you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.